Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Cloud Native Network Detection and Response. I'll be one of your hosts through this journey, where we'll talk about our journey to the cloud and much more. Here with me in studios, Mr. Matt Alderman.
Thank you.
Welcome. Nice to have you
Always
here
a
in
pleasure.
studio. Yes, very nice. On the lines remotely from ExtraHop, Shri Sundaralingam. We've had a lot of fun pronouncing your name in the announcements for this, Shri. So.
It's great to be here, guys. Thank you for having me.
Yes, nice to have you. Shri is the Vice President of Product and Solutions Marketing for ExtraHop. We also have Vince Strauss. Vince, what is your title? Is it Sales Engineer?
Yeah, Principal Sales Engineer, yep.
Principal Sales Engineer. Vince Strauss is here with us, also from ExtraHop. Vince is going to be driving the technical demo today, which I'm super excited about. I've been a packet nerd for a long, long time. And the ability to do that in the cloud is certainly, I think, a challenge that we've had for a long time. And it seems like the solutions are getting much, much better, which is good.
Yeah, well, the cloud providers are enabling others to make it much, much easier.
Yes. So today we'll talk about the journey to the cloud, the security responsibilities, where they may or may not fall in the cloud. We've got a nice matrix on that. Our functional areas of security as we have defined them. So those slides in the onset may look very familiar, but the content inside of them has changed such that we're going to take two of our matrices and talk about how they relate to the cloud. Which Matt was like, where's the information on how we do it? I'm like, wait, it's here.
It's there.
It's here. And then ExtraHop, of course, is going to talk about the cloud native NDR, an overview of that in architecture, and then also a demo. So let's jump right into it, which is interesting. Now, this slide actually represents our migration to the cloud, our journey to the cloud. We have an internal application here at Security Weekly that we use to publish all of our segments. Now, as it's kind of grown up over time, it also handles and is beginning to handle more and more of our business operations. Because there's really not great software in the world to manage a podcast business. There's some that manage aspects of publishing, but we built ourselves to basically automate our publishing. And we did that at first on premise. And it was actually not even in containers. It was running on physical hardware that was lived here in the studio. And what was interesting, what drove us to start moving to the cloud was hardware failure. Being a small team, hardware failure means a lot of people have to stop what they're doing. I don't remember where exactly in the journey we were. I think it was before cloud. I did actually put it inside of containers. So that was my first step in the journey. When we talk about legacy applications, the nice part about those developing newer applications is you can do that all in the cloud, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But our journey was running on physical hardware, then a movement to containers, then you start moving that to the cloud, right? Our containers were running locally, we had the hardware failures, then we said we got to move it to the cloud. So
one comment there, when you built the original containers, they were pretty heavy. Right?
They were awful.
Yes.
Like, I look back at what I did, and I was like, wow, I've learned so much since then. I'm like, that's just atrocious, right?
Yeah.
But we all have to start somewhere.
Right.
I mean, when I put it in containers, it was really kind of on that cusp time of containers being used in production. Like, people were still 2004, 15, 16-ish in that time frame. Some of us questioning, do we use containers in production or not? It was kind of just after that, and then things have gotten much, much better.
Because the original containers you built had a lot of the OS components, things that weren't highly portable.
Right.
Right? They were very linked to the hardware infrastructure that you still had in the environment. When we went to the cloud, that's when we started to realize, there's some optimization in the container environment that we could also make.
Yeah, so when I looked at that kind of first step into the cloud, and everyone's on a different maturity path and level of maturity in the cloud, in their journey to the cloud. So you can obviously host the infrastructure in the cloud. So you can take that server that we had here locally, and you can plop it in the cloud, and then maybe you run stuff on it. Now, in our case, we took that and we ran containers on top of it, right? Which is, it's not the best approach, but it is an approach and a step in the journey to getting to where you need to go, get your infrastructure up in the cloud. Then if you have some containers, put it on top of that infrastructure. Of course, you can run containers directly in the cloud. And there's lots of options to do that. Some of you may have seen some of my segments recently on how to do that specifically with Amazon's ECS, which we won't talk about in the next phase, but is a way to basically run containers directly in the cloud. And major cloud providers all have various ways to do that. Then,
so Paul,
yes, go ahead.
Paul, I just had a question. So I'm wondering, when you went through this, you probably started thinking about how am I going to lift and shift security controls as well, right, with your application. So
Absolutely.
Was there a lot of thinking, right, about the security architecture? What do you do? Initially leave it as it is, and then you evolve it later on? Like, what was your thought process there?
Yeah, it was interesting. When it's on premise, I could use my tried and true traditional tools, my network taps, other things that are on the host in order to maintain security and gain visibility into the applications. As I moved to the cloud, that was definitely left out. I mean, largely it was an internal application, that started growing. And my progression in security was basically to put agents, and I think we'll talk about this at some point, right, was to use agents inside of my containers to maintain that visibility into security. And it's a great question, Shri, because it sets me up for the next one is, then when you start to go serverless and use services, those agents or hooks into your containers, now you can't do that. You need a new strategy, right? And so that's where you'll see in the far right of this slide, this is the architecture that we're going to. It's not container-based. I have to say it took me several weeks, maybe even months, to come around to the fact that it's probably the best way to do it without containers. However, we still have those security controls that we need to worry about, which looks very different the further right on this slide that you get. Now, I also lumped services and serverless technologies together, as I think there's some nuances and differences there, right? If you look at a service like Amplify, which can basically run mobile applications as well as React or Vue applications, I had originally actually built containers to do that. But what's nice is we can utilize basically an Amazon service to run that. Now, inside of our application, we also have things that are what I deem as like truly serverless, which I would call AWS Lambda, right? So there are some pieces of the application that aren't going to live in the interface, the user interface portion, their backend processes, and it made a lot of sense to do that in AWS Lambda. For example, we take media and we publish it to a destination. Well, each of those publishing destinations is a very nice fit into being a Lambda function to do that. So the journey is kind of scary. I have to admit, having a background in traditional rack and stack hardware and taking it all the way to services and serverless is scary. There's a lot of things going on here in this diagram. Right?
And the internet gives you horrible advice on how to do it.
The internet gives you terrible advice. The internet gives you a lot of advice. If you want to implement the internet's advice, here's what I believe you to end up with. Something that may work in a test environment and work pretty good to get up and running in a test environment and have very little security controls and be configured securely. When you do it in production, it's different. There's a lot more resiliency built in. There's the repeatability built in to do a CI/CD pipeline with your application or your services or infrastructure you're providing. And also there's those security components. What we found in our developer Mars and I were talking, I think last week, that the people that are actually doing this in production don't often share how they're doing it, right? Because there's a lot of work that went into that. There might be some proprietary things in there. They don't often share that as to here's how you do it. And of course, it's going to differ for everyone. So again, one doesn't simply just go to the cloud. Oftentimes it's a journey. If you're migrating a legacy application, you'll probably go through some of these steps. If you're developing new, you may be looking at directly implementing it in cloud services and serverless architecture. And each of these all carry a different perspective on security and security controls, right?
Yeah.
Which we'll dig into in some of these slides, especially this one, right? When we talk about the different ways in which you can implement cloud technology. Now, Matt, this is your slides. If you want to set this up for us and kind of walk us through who's responsible for security as you go in this cloud journey.
Yeah, I mean, this is from Enterprise Security Weekly segment we did last year, because we were getting a lot of questions from our viewers about, what do I do for security in the cloud? And the answer is, it depends. What kind of cloud are you deploying? Are you deploying infrastructure as a service, or are you going to full-blown software as a service? Because in the shared responsibility model, there are certain components that might be managed by the cloud provider itself. But then there's other security controls you need to add above and beyond what is being provided by the actual cloud provider. So we created this matrix as part of that segment to help visualize, where am I responsible as a customer versus what the cloud providers are? And we broke it down by these different buckets. I talk about infrastructure as a service, where I am running a dedicated EC2 instance. And in that environment, parts of the network, the storage, the compute, and the virtualization layers are managed by the cloud providers. You may or may not have the ability to put security visibility controls in there. But then at the operating system level and up, I manage that. So my endpoint agents, my orchestration, my containers, my functions, etc., I'm still responsible for protecting them running on this infrastructure as a service. Where if you go to the full right and you're looking at a software as a service capability, you might have aspects of the application, primarily around configuration of certain settings and profiles within the app. You still have to manage the user access and user rights into the SaaS platform. So there's a lot less you potentially have to do in software as a service, and then really kind of everything in between.
Yeah. And it's interesting when we look at this matrix and you think about your security responsibilities, you may say, well, the further right that I go, the less responsibility I have for security, which isn't necessarily true. You still have a lot of responsibilities in security. But what you may also realize, and many of you probably looking at the slide realize, is that you've got applications and services in every single one of these columns, right?
Probably.
I mean, us today, we could almost check the boxes in every single column, right? You still have some of that on-premise physical infrastructure. Yes. You may have some infrastructure as a service. You may have some of that platform as a service.
The one we really don't have yet is the function as a service, the kind of the Lambda stuff.
The Lambda is I like that function as a service, because it really is just a place to just go run my code. And it's very, very ephemeral. Run my code for this and spin up infrastructure for just this short period of time and then spin it down. Yes. And gaining visibility into the security of those are, of course, very difficult. But also the ephemeral nature makes it, I think, harder, more difficult to even have an attack surface, right? Because there's much less of it, unless you're attacking the actual platform and the provider managed functions. But that's not your purview as a customer, right? It's up to Amazon or Microsoft or Google to make sure that there's integrity of their platform.
Right. And then we have SaaS, right? We've G Suite, HubSpot, GetResponse, some of our other tools are all SaaS-based tools. All we can do is manage access to the application, certain application controls, and then controlling the users that come into that environment. So on this list, we have 4 of the 5 today.
Right.
I would ask you guys just to make sure with this matrix, which I really like, by the way, I hadn't seen it put this way before. It's to make sure I'm understanding it right. Even say something like Amazon S3 is actually technically IaaS, right? And so in this, there's gray area there, right? So if you're using S3 that way, then you are responsible for your storage, right? And same with VPC flow logs or VPCs, for instance, you are responsible for your network controls and security. It just depends on how you're using those things. So it's pretty complicated for sure.
It is.
Vince's got a great point, right? Some of the services that you'll use from the cloud providers do blur the lines.
Yeah,
S3, Vince, great example.
In Vince, just for clarity, if anybody wants to go back and watch that ESW segment, we actually talk about aspects of vulnerability management and configuration management in these different environments. And I think the big thing with S3 and other cloud services is PaaS or a combination of IaaS and PaaS, is that configuration is still a big issue in the cloud space, and making sure that these services are configured correctly. That's still a big challenge, I think, pretty much across the stack.
Roger that. Thanks.
This is a great chart, guys. I sort of wanted to kind of reflect on, the way I also think about it is there's the infrastructure, right? Whether it's the workloads or containers or serverless, right? That you need to monitor and deal with threats. There's the application stack, right? And then there's data, right? So when you really think about this progression at IaaS level, you got to, monitor and deal with threats at the infrastructure as well as the application stack and at the data level, right? And then responsibility kind of reduces, right? When you get to the SaaS level, it's really you're concerned about rate data, right? Who has access to the data and how do you control it and how do you prevent unnecessary data leakage? So this is a really great chart in terms of thinking about, what the responsibility levels are and what kind of controls that would be relevant.
No, and it's a great point, Sri, and we have conversations all the time, and a lot of times about what we're going to use in terms of technology, and oftentimes it comes down to, can we build something that's more resilient and more secure than Amazon can, right? Typically the answer is no, right? And there's no business kind of benefit or driver for us to build our own authentication and authorization system when it's provided as a service by Amazon, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So many in the audience are, and if you think you've seen this slide, it's been tuned for this presentation, and it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek, my IOC, Indicators of Compromise Enchanted Quadrants, right? What are those? These are really, in my opinion, the 4 different places or areas in which you can collect data that will help you find those indicators or give you the opportunity to search through all of that data looking for indicators of compromise, right? So the first one in the upper left is endpoint security. We need some visibility into our endpoints, and I tried to put that as generically as possible, whether we're talking about, EDR or whatever the case may be, right? There's something on your endpoint that is collecting data, hopefully, protecting from some threats as well. But the challenge, as we've kind of already highlighted, is if this is my strategy for protecting my assets as they move into the cloud, you're going to reach a point where you can't put anything on your end. There is no endpoint to put anything on. It's owned by the cloud provider, which it's challenging to balance that in your security architecture to go, well, to protect against these threats, I rely on some type of endpoint agent. An endpoint could be a desktop, endpoint could be a container or a server or infrastructure, right? But at some point that goes away. And that's where things get kind of challenging when you're using cloud services and serverlesses. You don't have that endpoint purview. The next functional area being SIM or logs, right? And we actually have done good chunks of almost an entire webcast on the limitations of logs and kind of my gripes with logs. Not to say that you should discard them and not pay attention to them. However, they bring with it many, many challenges. And as I build out more and more infrastructure in the cloud, specifically in AWS, I'm starting to understand the challenges behind getting all of the logs, right? Where does everything send its logs? And when it utilizes this service, where is that log generated? Where can I pull back all of those logs? And then how do I correlate all of those different formats of logs? So I could be getting different formats from cloud. I could be getting different formats from, each different version of an application. So consolidating them and, of course, discovering the indicators of compromise inside of them is potentially an issue. Also, specifically with cloud, there's costs of storage and access. Mm-hmm. If I'm generating a lot of logs and I'm storing them in the cloud, I'm paying for that storage. If I need to access them and bring those back to some solution, even inside the cloud provider, to another cloud provider or on-premise, now I got to pay for that, right? So there can be a really big hit in terms of your budget. So then we move to, I'll move to threat intelligence next. How do you gain enough visibility into your cloud services to be able to correlate that data, right? It kind of speaks to what if you don't have an endpoint agent on there? And what if you're struggling with getting a unified logging solution? You've got this great threat intelligence that's like, well, this could be an issue. Let's go see if we have it. How do you get that out of the cloud to be able to correlate it to your threat intelligence is, in my opinion, the issue there. And then, of course, we get to network detection and prevention. And I'm just a huge fan of the network doesn't lie, right? And this has always been, I think, as we look at those other three functional areas, our level set, right? If it's something bad's going to happen, it's going to have to traverse the network. So this is my source of truth. And how do you gain that network visibility in the cloud as well as on-prem and correlate those two together, which is why we love our sponsor ExtraHop, because they do just that, and allow you to correlate those two things together, as well as providing a lot of other value in that area. But this is something that we can't lose sight of because of all of the other challenges, I think, in the other areas. You need that network visibility, even when you go up to the cloud. Mm-hmm. So then, sorry, was there comments on or questions on that one? Shri, Vince? Okay. So now I've got more quadrants, right? And this is my blue team, Enchanted Quadrants, which is, again, another tongue-in-cheek kind of look at it. But these are the major functional areas that I think blue teams have to deal with in order to be able to defend a network. And I think that application development aside, right? I think that's another probably Enchanted Quadrant slide. And if you're looking at outside of the application side, right? Matt likes to talk about user, apps, and data. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, right? And this speaks to some of the application side. So if we look at that, there's 4 functional areas that you need to be really good at in order to secure your network. And the first is configuration management. And I think this is something that scares people who are on the blue team, right? Because if you start thinking about all of the different points of configuration inside of all of your applications, inside of all of your infrastructure, now start going to look at all of the configuration that lives in your cloud providers, plural, and you start to get really depressed on how to manage all of that configuration, understanding that one small change to that configuration, especially in the cloud, could expose something that you don't want to be exposed.
And this is where we see the breaches in the cloud. The breach isn't happening at the cloud provider. It's happening due to a misconfiguration in one of these services that's exposing an S3 bucket, for example. Someone
once said misconfiguration will lead to compromise. That was me, by the way, several years ago on the podcast. But so again, configuration in the cloud, extremely complex and ever-changing. Then we get to vulnerability and patch management. Now we have our struggles. Matt and I come from that background in vulnerability management, right? But in the cloud, it's the ephemeral nature that can make things very difficult to get a snapshot in time of just where am I with vulnerabilities and patches, right? There are some great solutions that I think during build time, during deployment time, can help you identify vulnerabilities before they get pushed up into the cloud. But what's interesting is the issue that I'm seeing there, and I've actually done this experiment, right, is when you start rolling up your application, there are things that can check the infrastructure or however you've built it and go, yeah, you built it and it's got 2,300 vulnerabilities. And I'm like, well, that's great. I'm doing an awesome job of vulnerability patch management. But then, I speak with my friends and coworkers and I'm like, how important are those vulnerabilities that are in my container image that are maybe not exploitable because of the way I've got my application? So it almost complicates it because we've got so much visibility into how the container in this example is built that we just get this whole big long list of vulnerabilities. How do we prioritize those, right? That becomes the challenge. And of course, if you're trying to do traditional scanning, infrastructure is coming up and down. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Right. So I was going to comment, Paul, on this. This is like very typical, right, in terms of friction between, DevOps and security, right? So here you have an existing control that's been well proven, that's actually meaningful to be applied to cloud. But how do you do it in a DevOps environment without, breaking that cycle and meaningfully, right, helping to manage the risk? So this is again back to the lift and shift comment I made earlier, when you move applications to the cloud, how do you kind of re-architect your security architecture, along with monitoring, right, response capability that can integrate with DevOps and help you with that journey.
Absolutely.
Then we get to identity management. This is the user piece. How do you integrate and monitor identities into the cloud, right?
And it's not just user. It's machines now. It's containers.
It's application
it's service
services.
accounts. It's all kinds of stuff.
Yes.
IAM
is a whole thing in and of itself that you could go get a separate degree in, right? Just managing IAM, and it becomes, like Matt said, not just the identity of your users, but the identity of your applications, machines, and services, and also 2 levels of users, right? There are users of the cloud, maybe developers, maybe systems administrators, and you have to manage their roles and policies. But also then when you put an application in the cloud, how is it going to validate who's a valid user? Does that tie into Active Directory? Does that tie into an Amazon provided directory service? And so how do you build that into your application? So challenges there. And then of course asset management, which shares a similar challenge to vulnerability and patch management with immutable infrastructure, and tracking all of this in what exactly do I have spun up in the cloud. Sometimes you don't realize that till you get the bill and you're like, wait, why is my bill so much higher than last month? It's because someone was in a different region and spun something up and forgot about it, right? So of course there's challenges in asset management. Now, what I think is really nice is it all rides on top of network visibility detection and response, because all of these challenges can be less of a challenge if you've got really good network visibility detection and response capabilities locally, as your employees maybe are accessing the cloud from a network that you're monitoring, and also inside the cloud providers themselves, going down to the network level helps make these challenges, I think, much less. And
I hope so.
I think that's a great segue, put there purposely, right, to pass the ball over to Vince and Shri to talk about just how we do that in cloud-native environments.
Great. Thank you, Paul and Matt. So this is great. So, sort of focusing more on network detection response, right? How that, delivers that visibility, and then, detection and response is complete workflow, right, for security professionals. And back to my comments about DevOps and, making sure we can integrate into cloud native environments and help, in terms of security team reduce that friction, right, with DevOps and cloud infrastructure teams is critical. So let's get into it. If you could go to the next slide for me and build it out for me, Matt. So you guys did a great job with that quadrant. I love it, and I'm going to use a triad analogy here. And it's like the nuclear triad, right? We're in this era of cyber warfare, and, the logs, obviously help. Agents, when you can instrument workloads, do help. But having this third leg that we talked about with network visibility and the network data, it's critical, right? As part of this, strategy, security operations teams can develop to monitor the cloud environment, right, and look for emerging, patterns of threat and respond to it. And you guys touched on this a little bit earlier. What we're focusing on is, in addition to, cloud and multi-cloud environments, data center, right, remote sites, and providing that complete visibility, right, from a network perspective to be able to leverage during the security operations personnel's day-to-day activities. And one other thing, I don't have it here, I would like to add is IoT, right? IoT is another example where there's more and more IoT deployment in the enterprise now. You cannot instrument it, right? You cannot put an agent on it. And a lot of those IoT devices don't even generate logs. So again, make the point stronger, right, about why you need network visibility to be able to deal with those emerging threats. So I'm going to pull Vincent here. He's got some great thoughts on event-driven security in the cloud.
Yeah, thanks, Sri. So this slide is really, there's a lot of moving parts. The point of this one here is not really about the pieces and parts, but more about sort of the flow from left to right, where on the left-hand side of the image there, where you have sort of the purple box in the middle. So sort of to the left of that are all the different ways that things in the cloud can be interacted with, created read from, updated, deleted, your standard sort of CRUD operations, if you will. All of that in a cloud environment is going to go through the purple box in the middle, which is this control plane or the API. So speaking here, it's clearly geared more towards AWS. Everything has to go through there, whether you're in the console or on the command line. So because of that, on the bottom there, you have DevOps, which, they're spinning up 10,000 instances a day and 4 million containers because they're free and it's fun and anyone can do it. How does security keep up with that? How does SecOps keep up with that? And I've heard quotes as bad as directly from Amazon, from their own security architects and professional services folks, that they see customers with ratios as bad as 100 developers to 1 security, or 7 security to 100, as bad as 1 to 100. And how on earth can SecOps be expected to scale with DevOps? And this is an example where, by using things like CloudTrail, CloudWatch events, and function as a service like Lambda, SecOps can actually now operate in parallel with DevOps, and they don't even know it, to deploy their controls at scale, to verify compliance, make sure that the drives are encrypted on the instances and that they're following their policies, things like that. So at the top, you have SecOps, at the bottom, you have DevOps, and you have that beautiful green band in the middle where they can sort of meet in the middle there. So that's kind of the depiction here. Thanks, Sri.
Cool. So let's get a little more into cloud native network detection and response, right? Delivered as a service. So if you can go to the next slide for me. So what do we mean by cloud native India, right? It's not about just throwing some virtual appliances or virtual sensors in the cloud, right? It's delivering this as a service. And I'll give you guys an example why this matters. So machine learning, when you look at with the incorporation of data science, right? In order to scale it, right? If you deliver as a cloud service, the data that we're seeing in the customer's environment, in addition to the data that we see across all the other deployments we have, right? The anonymized telemetry that we collect, that we can use to evolve, our detectors, right? And keep these sensors up to date. It's very difficult to sort of implement and scale machine learning at a sensor level. So delivered as a service using the cloud is a better way to go for it. So it's really, think about, cloud delivered, right? It has the benefits of using the cloud to scale out. Anything from capabilities like machine learning and behavioral analytics modeling that we do to help customers stay ahead of threats, to your traditional SaaS benefits, right? We can manage software updates. We can manage, threat updates without customers having to manually, manage and configure these sensors. And if you can imagine, in a large-scale cloud build-out environment, once you start to deploy dozens and dozens of sensors, it becomes very tedious, right, for the security operations team. So that's, sort of what we mean by cloud delivery, right? Making it easily scalable, right? And using technologies like the machine learning can be delivered, from the cloud to be able to scale. Cloud agnostic, right? Don't get necessarily tied into a particular cloud service provider architecture. So how do you, as organizations, right, look to use 2 or 3 different cloud service providers? How do you provide a security model that can be, cloud agnostic in terms of looking at the network visibility and the detection and response, use cases and capabilities, right? So it's very important, to us. We've had very tight partnership and working relations with AWS, with traffic mirroring that they launched. I think we didn't talk about it earlier, but native cloud, one of the cloud native capabilities that Matt, Vince will touch on later in the demo, is using traffic mirroring that's provided by AWS. Google, GCP, they announced packet mirroring. Recently, they're going to bring into market, and others like Microsoft Azure, they're working on it as well. So it's important for us to leverage those cloud native capabilities, but at the same time, be cloud agnostic in terms of how we can deliver, right? The network visibility detection and response. The last one is intelligence, right? And Paul, you touched on it earlier. So how do you the visibility that we have, right, across, whether the application layer, across our, customer deployment itself, right? It could be cloud combined with data center combined with remote sites, and help customers, deal with emerging threats. but also feed the global threat telemetry that we are collecting, right? And using our, again, machine learning and behavioral analytics type of models help them, benefit from that intelligence to stay ahead of threats that may not have hit them yet. So this is kind of our viewpoint on, hey, how do you define what is a cloud native NDR? Cool. So getting a little bit into RevealX Cloud for AWS. So this is the one we're going to go through a little more detail and give you guys, give your viewers a demo as well. So I talked about traffic mirroring. So AWS has generally made this functionality available to all of their customers. So in the customer's VPC environment itself, you can enable traffic mirroring. And for any of the EC2 instances, you could start to, just like physical taps, right? You deploy on a data center network or a remote, corporate network. You could start to tap the VPC environment. And really, RevealX Cloud essentially takes that wired data, right? And essentially, we're processing it and, building out our sort of the deep analytics, capability, right? Where we can start to, not only give visibility in terms of the work, whether it's workloads or containers or serverless, to, any threats that are starting to emerge, providing a workflow, right, for the security operations team. And I'll go through that in a second, and Vince is going to demonstrate that. And it's important to have this global search and query capability from an incident response perspective. If you think about it, when you start to build out multi-cloud, right, you don't want to have siloed views, right, in terms of being able to deal with threats which are emerging. So being able to sort of, when you see, a threat, being able to sort of integrate in the investigation workflow in a seamless way is very, critical. Using that global search and query, capability. And then I talked about machine learning capability as well that's integrated with it, so that really, it's delivered as a SaaS, and it makes it easier to spin up sensors in AWS environment in as many as VPCs customers have, right? And then it gives the ability to, really reduce the deployment time and the management burden, and then start benefiting, right, from a security team perspective. And it doesn't frustrate the DevOps team because essentially, we're providing this in a way without sort of disrupting the DevOps workflow. So, so just to kind of give you guys a little more insight into that. So if you go to the next slide.
Sure. One quick question on that one real quick. Mm-hmm. I assume when Google's packet mirroring capability comes out and eventually Microsoft's, those are just a couple of those bubbles on the left that then just tie back into that central SaaS offering in the middle, right?
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. You nailed it. Yeah. So, so from a workflow perspective, right? And Vince is actually going to show you guys a sort of a real threat scenario. We'll run through how can we provide, if you build it out, Matt, for me. So it just shows from detection, validation, investigation, root cause perspective, how we can provide a seamless workflow for the security personnel. And we'll show it to you. I think it's better to see the demo, and you can realize how easy it is. So if you go to the next one, so some of the key differentiators for us is, as I mentioned, we can scale out, right, as the deployment gets larger, or scale down, right, as customers need it. Application layer decoding is important, right? Being able to see at the application level, at the services level, is key to provide that intelligence. Line rate decryption, right? More and more traffic is encrypted. So you could use RevealX Cloud to implement decryption and benefit from that, along with the detection investigation workflow. Automated response, it's automated response. There's a scenario that Vince is going to show you with API-based integration with AWS. So we could, whether it's the native APIs available, natively on the CSP, for the CSP, or even third-party security controls that we can integrate with to provide response capability that can be driven, from our product. So that's sort of a quick snapshot of key capabilities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Vince, to go through the demo.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that, Sri. And in fact, so the slide that's up right now is, sort of the point there is to show what will be demoed live. Actually, if I can go ahead and share the screen and get started, I'll pull that slide back up right before we do it.
Go ahead.
Should I just go ahead and share? All right, great. All right. Are we coming through okay?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, great.
Yeah.
So what you guys are seeing here on the screen is the same thing you would see if you went to our website and clicked on the online demo. So we do make our full stack available on the website for anyone to come and either go through those scenarios that I just canceled out, or you can click the X and explore the product sort of at will. The three main areas, the three types of data that we pull off the network are features or metrics or dimensions. It just depends on the vendor. But those are what are used both for investigation, as you'll see in a moment, as well as feeding into our machine learning models. Just a quick aside, I'm surprised Sri didn't mention this, just because we're so used to saying this to customers that everyone has ML, obviously, but the only reason as a technologist that I can stand here and say that you should care about ours is similar to what I think Google said a few years ago. I think they said, we don't have the best algorithms, we just have more data than anybody else. And that when you're pulling 5,000 plus dimensions for every device off the network in real time, you have this mountain of data, and machine learning is just perfect for that. So those features that we extract, we surface within the UI. The other key thing with NDR, network detection and response, is that these devices should be recording all the time. The goal here is not just to give you a new alert cannon. The goal is to be able to constantly be monitoring all of the relationships and connections between all the different services running on your network, both on-prem or in the cloud, or both when you have hybrid applications, and be able to see that regardless of whether or not a vendor says that there's a particular thing you should look at. And that's exactly what we do. Here you start to see some health indicators we're surfacing. These are not alerts necessarily. These are things that can contribute to background noise that can make it very difficult for threat hunting or incident response, where you're trying to find things and you have a lot of noise. But these can also turn into IOCs in certain scenarios, and we're obviously covering that as well. Then perimeter view up here at the top, just real quick. NDR solutions should absolutely be focused on, that shift in the market that's happening, or I should say the shift in the SOC that the market's following, where people are moving more from prevention and protection to detection and response, prevention and protection to detection and response. And in other words, saying when will we be breached? We want to make sure we catch it extremely fast. Well, ExtraHop and any NDR vendor worth its weight should be absolutely an east-west first or a client-server first type solution. You need to be able to handle sort of the Niagara Falls of inside the M&M, if you will, to have that full coverage. So north-south then should be nothing. It's a couple gigs of traffic versus the massive amount of traffic internally. So here you're just seeing sort of a view of that traffic. What are all of my assets that are accepting connections from the internet, for instance? What's able to get out right now? I want to go look at that and see those conversations, see the communications. But then you can also, as I mentioned before, explore things sort of on demand, like this web server that's starting to exhibit some potential C2 behavior. Well, let's go look at it. When I do that, notice you're not just now looking at an alert that says command and control, congratulations, go check your logs. You're instead given a full holistic picture of every single connection this device has made, every peer it's talked to, any anomalous behavior that's been detected on the device that we'll look at in a moment. Typically in time series, right? So seeing, low-level recon, much worse sort of RCEs here, and then, role flips, something going from a victim to an offender suddenly, and having that time context. But then also when it's time to actually investigate something, having additional information, again, over time, as well as, full history and likelihood, complexity, how impactful is this, references to frameworks, at all costs trying to help level up the SOC. Because obviously, digging through and triaging alerts is a hard job. But finally, as I said before, when you're recording everything, then when solutions say you see these little halos and we say, this web server was definitely compromised. Aren't you proud of us for telling you that? well, look at all these other things that we saw anomalous behavior on too. Isn't that cool? But what about the stuff that we didn't think was anomalous, like the fact that this web server is always accessing a database? That can be very difficult to detect anomalous behavior, even with machine learning that's supposed to solve all of our problems. You still need to have all that data to say, okay, I know this host was compromised. I need to now scope this incident and have a full picture of everything that happened, regardless of what the vendor thinks. So in this case here, a single click with a network detection and response solution should give you a full list of the actual transactions right off the network. Notice, as we've sort of said multiple times, there's no agents here, but you can still do things like say, I know this particular server has some really sensitive tables. I'm going to go look at those and see, make sure none of these queries touch up. So clearly someone selected everything out of this table. They did something else here. They're using a root account to gain access. Well, now at this point, now it's time to go to packets. Notice we haven't done that yet. Typically, folks think of network, and this goes all the way back to the quadrant where we were talking about logs and how expensive it can be to store piles and piles of logs. Well, folks are used to needing to store piles and piles of packets to get this type of information. But with NDR solutions, you can actually do all that feature extraction and analysis in memory these days because computers are fast now. And so you can do all that and just store the metadata and throw the packets away, or archive them off in, say, Glacier or somewhere really cheap, and just go get them when you need them. So this is what that looks like with our solution. You're looking at that metadata. You see the queries were made. You need to make that last click and say, give me those packets in case, for that full forensic evidence. Now you know exactly what data they pulled out of that table. And then finally, when decryption is in play, as you see here, solutions like ExtraHop will also do full line rate decryption, including PFS, and be able to then escrow those session keys for your incident responders to actually decrypt that pile of encrypted packets that you're paying a lot of money to store. Why not be able to decrypt it later as well? So that's kind of what we're showing there. The last thing I'll mention with this sort of more canned demo before I jump into an actual live automated demo is being able to have real-time intelligence that stripes across the full organization. So, not everybody likes to get into the weeds of all the metrics and data, but being able to say, you have this pile of information, Mr. Network Detection and Response Vendor, why don't you make that available to my execs with pretty colors without me needing to put it, do all that for you. So here you go, on-demand reports, including, attack surface, hygiene, all these fun things. That absolutely should be a minimum requirement of any network vendor in our opinion. So moving forward into more of a demo, as I mentioned before, this kind of what I'm going to go through here, there we go, is an automated response demo. I'm going to go a little fast because I know I'm running short on time here. So you notice in the top is RevealX, obviously. And to the right, as we sort of go to the right, you see the word detection. So the idea here is, as soon as a solution like ExtraHop or any other API first or API friendly type solution detects something in a cloud environment, what they shouldn't do is instantly make an API call directly out and try to say quarantine or snapshot like down here on the left. The cloud native or event driven way to do this is to say post it to SNS, where the organization can decide how they want to handle that, who they want to have subscribed to this particular detection or message. In this case, we're going to use Lambda, which is function as a service, as was mentioned before, to catch that message and take action instantly by quarantining the device, which is just applying a security group, and snapshotting it, and then reaching back into, in this case, ExtraHop's RevealX product, so that we can tag that device so that when the analyst lands into the UI, they see that an action was taken. So that's what we're going to demo here. Before I jump into and get a little bit more nerdy, Sri, is there anything I missed that you would add?
No, it's great. Go for it.
Okay, great.
Great.
So let's, all right. So before I do this, what we're going to do is, this is a host being monitored by ExtraHop in Amazon. So we call it Oasis. That's our funny name for our honeypots. This is live on the internet right now. And so you can see it's getting peppered with different scans and stuff. It's kind of fun to watch, as you would expect. But what we're going to see is that this host is suddenly going to get quarantined as soon as we log in and do something bad. So here on the left, in the left browser, or I'm sorry, the left terminal window, there's, if you're familiar with Linux, this is just a watch command. There's nothing fancy going on here, but you're going to see at the top that it's sort of refreshing every 1 second. So that's why it's sort of flashing up there. And what we're doing is we're querying just through the API The security groups currently assigned to the instance. So we see that there are 2 groups assigned, which controls, if you're not familiar, that controls their ingress and egress rules of what traffic's allowed in and out. We're asking the API for a certain type of snapshot that matches our naming convention that matches a forensic image or something that was created through automation in response to an alert like this. And then right below that, I'm just querying all the VPC flow logs for this particular instance. So we can kind of see in real time, every 1 second, this will refresh as we go through this exercise. On the right-hand side, I'm actually or I'm logged into the box over SSH, I should say, into this Oasis 2 host that you can see there. The demo script, which I'll actually just cat this for those who trust no one. This is just a simple wget out to a known bad place that has a bad certificate. So we're going to simulate some C2 traffic here, going in specifically using NDR to inspect the certificate, the SSL layer. So you notice on the left, within say a second, maybe 2, I'll say 3 to be liberal, I now have a new security group called null. I now have a forensic image being produced automatically. So I have a snapshot and I have a quarantine action within just a few seconds. And in the right-hand side there, you can see that my terminal session is actually locked. So if you had an interactive session, if someone was actually interactively logged in, they've now been dropped. The host has been quarantined, not shut down, until the snapshot's finished, so that you maintain that current state. You get everything in memory if you're lucky, and you kind of have that current state, and then you can take action from there. Down below, we're still refreshing the logs. I'm not beating up on logs. I want to be really careful here. It's just, this boils down to speed and context. If you notice, typical, this is a VPC flow logs. We're looking for this IP here, the 104.196. And we're still waiting, right? We still don't see anything in the logs, but yet we've already taken action. We've already started our response. In fact, if we jump back into the ExtraHop appliance and refresh here, if an analyst received a notification, say they were subscribed to that SNS message with a link back to ExtraHop, they click in and see we've already quarantined the device for you, so an action was taken. You now have an alert, which is a specific detection that says this is what we did. It was a suspect SSL peer. It's a newly issued certificate. And we also had a threat intelligence hit on this guy, and so it's been shut down. As we said before, you go investigate. You can see it was quarantined. You see the IPs. You can now also then jump back in time and start looking and say, I want to go back a few weeks and have a look at the full history of this device. Oh, what's this? And we're back all the way in January now, looking at what appears to be a spike in SSH sessions when maybe this thing was someone was able to gain access, right? So that very, very quick context, obviously when you're operating from a position on the network, and I'll sort of wrap up here by reiterating the difference between NDR and logs being both speed, but also, we talked about that pile of logs. Well, none of what we just did required storing a single packet on a disk anywhere. You can actually achieve this context and speed analyzing SSL connections, for instance, without storing a single packet. Yeah. So I think as far as the demo is concerned, that's kind of all I had for this session. Yeah, thanks, guys.
That's pretty amazing to be able to automatically quarantine something like that based on a network detect. It's something I wish I always had back in the day when I was monitoring a university network and worms were running around. As soon as I detected if I could quarantining it, even on a traditional network, was hard. I had to create a ticket. Yeah. I had to go to the network operations group. I had to say, this machine is infected. And oftentimes they would say, oh yeah, we've noticed a high volume of traffic coming, from that particular area. And my tools were able to grab it a little sooner than theirs. And then they had to go trace down the port, right? And there was no quarantining. It was like, let's turn the port off. And then sometimes what would happen is they would unplug from that port and they'd plug into a different port, and then the same thing would happen again, right? So then we started, blocking by MAC address, and all of this was a very manual process. Even there might have been tickets involved. It was me going to the network team to say, hey, I need you to quarantine this host based on observed network traffic. This host is bad, right? And now being able to fully automate that, so your solutions tied into in this case, AWS, in two ways. You're mirroring the traffic and getting a capture of that, but you're also tied back into the API so that you can take actions. That's
well
pretty
said.
awesome.
In fact, one thing I should mention, and thank you for the color there. This is a fun demo, and we definitely have customers doing this, but more common as well. I mean, this may seem like, and it's one of the things that for years and years, ExtraHop's always been an API first solution. So when we're on-prem, we've been exploring integrations with customers for years, but they're typically one-off, one-to-one integrations, unless they're using a SOAR platform, which then we all kind of put our party hats on and have a lot of fun. But typically in the cloud, everyone has the same tools, everyone has the same API endpoints, so we can all talk about the same solutions. But even auto quarantining scares people. So more common things that we see can be a lot more simple, but extremely effective, like updating your security group with known bad IPs. When we see bad behavior, let's just toss that in the security group and shut down the traffic from there, for a little while. Maybe you pull it out in a few days. That kind of stuff is trivial.
Yeah, I was going to say, rather than it looks like you switched the security group of that particular asset, right? You could also through the API, add inbound and outbound blocking rules to that security group for that suspicious IP address, correct?
Exactly. So you're not dropping the whole server. In this case, the activity was sourced from the server, so it needs to be shut down. It was owned. But you're absolutely right. Most common, especially for publicly exposed services, you should probably just block the source for now and not shut the whole thing down. Or, we do have some customers that deploy and destroy and respond to certain events.
Right. Yeah. That buys you time, and I love it as a solution.
Well,
because,
with infrastructure defined as code, right? And
so I can destroy it and rebuild it.
It's ephemeral. You just destroy it. You go back to the last known good and bring it back up.
And then analyze and see what was the security exposure, and then fix it, and then redeploy again.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the strategy I like, and you folks make that part of that process like so awesome and easy, and make that actually possible, right? Because you're also snapshotting, so I can do forensics and quickly get to like, hey, this machine's been snapshotted, right? Forensics, going back to university, was me trekking across campus, physically visiting the machine, right? And it could be hours before I was even notified.
With your floppy disk?
And, yeah, exactly. And it could be longer for me, to get there, find the machine. This is just sending an alert saying, hey, I've snapshotted this. You can go in, do your forensics, and then push out a new image. It's awesome.
The only thing I would add there, I guess, is that evidence collection, right? For, that's another thing where we'll explore with customers, and we're just for full transparency, it's a solution we've architected, but we have some customers looking at it now. But for instance, our solution supplies APIs to pull packets. So if you are using us to store packets, which we do that, I like to beat up on it for the same reason, logs are expensive.
And how long can you store those packets for? Vince, is that really just...
It's configurable based on the needs of the customer, but imagine being able to, with that same response, have just another Lambda function subscribe to that same SNS topic that's job is to go hit ExtraHop and starts pulling all the metadata and packets off and dropping them in an S3 bucket so they don't say roll off, right? That's all fair game.
Gotcha.
That stuff gets really fun.
And a proof of concept, how does that work? If people want to try it out in their own environments.
Yeah, Shri may have something to add here, but from a technical sort of nuts and bolts perspective, it's something we spin up in a day. So we offer 30-day free trials of our solution in RevealX Cloud, where it's a matter of being able to create an interface basically on your account. You attach that to our stack effectively, and we're able to do full analysis on your workloads. Some of the limitations being EC2 instances have to be running Nitro, just to be clear on that. Hopefully you're using Nitro already. It's faster and cheaper and better and much better colors. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Turn it on and go.
Awesome.
Yeah. You said it well, Vince, because it's a SaaS offering, right? So easy to deploy it and try it and see the value, and then start scaling it from there. So absolutely.
And I can host this in ExtraHop's cloud, or I can host it in my own cloud, correct?
That's right. We have self-managed or managed offerings, if you want to look at it that way. Yep, definitely. You can launch our stuff right in your own VPC and even monitor our own interfaces and watch the monitor the monitor.
Right.
monitor, which can be kind of fun, actually. Yeah.
It's like that mirrored effect where you see all the mirrors of yourself, like just into infinity, right?
Exactly. And then you get a call from Amazon for breaking things.
don't want that call.
And now I'm assuming in the RevealX interface, if I had multiple VPCs and multiple sets of infrastructure on AWS, it would designate those that like this was in this VPC, it had this IP address, right? Because a lot of that can be kind of blurred in terms of you may have a local subnet that overlaps with the other subnet. I'm assuming it gives you indications of where it's coming from.
Yeah, everything from dynamic device grouping based on loads of different types of criteria to like tag syncing, dropping in account IDs. Another one is like gateways. When you're running in a VPC, it's not always clear. You need to know where that traffic's going. It could be going across a peering connection to another VPC. Mm-hmm. It could be hitting a transit gateway. It could be hitting a VPN gateway or a NAT gateway or a gateway du jour. We'll label all that stuff in the UI automatically through API calls and inference just from reassembling all those transactions. We get quite a bit that way as well.
That's really cool. And the VPC is independent of the availability zone. So if I have an elastic infrastructure that's spinning up more of my services or EC2 in other availability zones, I'm assuming that's all tied back to the VPC?
Definitely. So that would, again, just be tagging where we would show you, and group your assets by VPC. But then you would also, in that sense, want to be able to group them by subnet because your subnets can't be stretched across AZs, as you know. So having the VPC identifier and the AZ identifier and the subnet ID and all that together is what you need to know sort of where something lives. Yeah,
gotcha.
For sure.
Gotcha. Awesome.
That was it for. Oh wait,
one more question. Are there training tutorials online?
Absolutely. And Sri, you want to take that one? I've been jumping out there.
So I think, when you subscribe to the 30-day trial, right, you will get access to some of the training material. That's probably the best way to kind of see how you could start using the product and get a better understanding of it.
Plus, you get a little bit of that in the interactive demo, I think, as well, that you guys post on your website, right? Mm-hmm. So people can go in and interact with that demo and maybe they don't have access to the full tutorials, but they can actually kind of get their hands on it and kind of test out what's actually happening in there.
Yeah. Yep, we definitely don't hide anything behind a paywall in that regard. We want people to explore the technology. We're open that way. We want you to see it, but also the same with your data. We don't charge data taxes. We don't hold your data hostage. You can export it, import it. You can explore the product at will. As well as I think there's a few attack and sort of live scenarios you can go through there. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's great.
Well, Sri and Vince, thank you so much for appearing on this webcast with us. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. We will see you next time.
This is great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.